So United Kingdom Prime Minister Theresa May, she just announced that Britain would be eradicating its net contribution to climate change by 2050. And so this is a legally binding target based on recommendations from the Parliament's Committee on Climate Change. And basically, what it does is the United Kingdom had already committed to cutting emissions by 80% by 2050 compared to 1990. And now the target is net zero by 2050, which doesn't mean no emissions, but that any CO2 emissions have to be offset or removed. And it's not an actual plan. But if you look at the committee's recommendations, you get some indications of what the commitment would require. So they talk about by 2035, all new cars must be electric. All buildings must be retrofitted and decarbonized. People must consume less meat. Thermostats in the winter should be set no higher than 66 degrees Fahrenheit. And the thing that is striking to me about this, well, there's two things. So one is Extinction Rebellion, which is this criminal activist movement that we've talked about in the podcast before. They describe this as a betrayal. So there's just one quote from their Twitter account. Let's not mince words. 2050 is a death sentence. People are already dying, and this will only get worse with far off dates. Were we to put our minds to it to address the threat, the UK could embrace transformative change and decarbonize in years, not decades. And I mean, just FYI, the UK gets, like the US, about 80% of its energy from fossil fuels and about, a few percent from so-called renewables. So the idea that this is doable in a few years for many reasons, but just that gives you a sense of like, it's delusional to think this is a couple-year program. But the thing that I really found disturbing about this is just the whole idea of the government setting fundamental economic goals, which is essentially what this is. It's we're going to rearrange the entire way of life of Britons. I mean, what kind of cars you're going to drive, how warm you're allowed to keep your house or apartment, and like even what you're eating. And, you know, I think often in debates today, like, saying, oh, this is socialism is kind of thrown around in a really loose, meaningless way. But this really is fundamentally like socialism. It's that you're going to central plan the economy. The only difference is the old socialists were pretending that we're going to have the government plan the economy in order to achieve progress and prosperity. And this is we're going to plan the economy in order to reduce progress and prosperity. And, we'll see how it plays out in actual practice, but just that this is considered idealistic rather than terrifying is what I find terrifying.
Yeah, I mean the means are horrible, but I mean just the if we're thinking about energy from a human flourishing perspective, it should just be a huge alarm bell to say we are setting a goal of, in effect, zero side effects by X amount of time. I mean, I've been using this example a lot today, but if you said, like, okay, zero vaccine side effects or like vaccine neutrality or something like that by 2050, you'd think, well, is that a good goal? I mean, maybe if you had a really, really good way to prevent disease that didn't have those side effects, then sure. But if you don't, then and this thing is extending so many people's lives, and the absence of it would be a huge problem. You'd think, no, that is not a good kind of goal to have. And energy is, in a sense, I mean, I don't know if it's harder than vaccines, but it's so fundamental in every aspect of the economy, and it's something where the time horizon of investment in terms of just how many investments we've already made to use fossil fuels through 2050 and how involved it is to change that, and how involved how disruptive it would be to try to use alternative technologies, even if they were good enough. But now, like, the alternative technologies people are talking about are not nearly good enough at all. And they're also completely dependent on fossil fuels. So there's just this whole phenomenon of acting like, oh, solar and wind are net zero. It's like, no, those are totally made using fossil fuels are only as cheap as they are because of fossil fuel mining and fossil fuel manufacturing and fossil fuel transportation. And then, as we've discussed in previous episodes, the whole way they operate is they operate parasitically on reliable energy systems, mostly based on fossil fuels. And they make those reliable energy systems less efficient because those energy systems have to cycle up and down like stop and go traffic to handle the unreliable fuel sources. So you're actually burning extra fossil fuels because of this parasitical destructive relationship that the unreliable fuels have on the reliable energy system. So just like, what are you going to do to actually get to net zero? Like, there is no mechanism at all. And so I mean, right now, the way I think of it is a requirement of human survival and flourishing today is emitting CO2. That's just, it is a largely unpreventable side effect of human flourishing. And if you recognize that, then just like medical side effects today are an unpreventable, uh, largely unpreventable byproduct of human flourishing. It's not that now, you can do different things to limit different ones, but if you were to say no, zero medical side effects by 2050, well, medicine is how we cure ourselves, how we prevent ourselves from dying, and energy is how we live, including how we prevent ourselves from dying. So it's just this whole thing of, we're not looking at it from a human flourishing perspective. We're just looking at the side effects without looking at the benefits. And that has to lead to a disastrous decision in any field. And then the more fundamental the field, the more disastrous. And this is just about the most fundamental area.